Claire Ashworth's farm was gone by the time the soil finished healing. That sentence is worth sitting with, because everything that follows is true, and every piece of it will contradict what most people think they know about farming, about regenerative agriculture, and about what it means to succeed at something while still losing. By the spring of 2022, Claire's 48-acre farm on the Oregon coast had some of the best soil test results her county extension agent had seen in 15 years of practice. Organic matter, 5.8%. Earthworm population, more than doubled from baseline. Water infiltration, 4 times faster than neighboring conventional fields. Cover crop establishment, textbook. Every metric that matters for long-term soil health, trending in exactly the right direction. Her bank account told a different story. By April of that year, Claire Ashworth could not make payroll for herself. The farm that was ecologically thriving was financially dying. And 6 months later, she signed the papers that ended it. This is not a story about what she did wrong. She didn't do anything wrong. This is a story about the gap between what regenerative agriculture promises and what nobody tells you it costs to get there, and why that gap is quietly ending farms that the soil tests say should be thriving. Claire Ashworth was 34 years old when she left a project management role at a logistics firm in Portland and bought the land. She was not naive about it. That matters. She had spent 2 years before the purchase reading everything available on regenerative agriculture: Gabe Brown, David Montgomery, the NRC's soil health literature, extension service reports from 3 different states. She had attended a week-long intensive at a regenerative farming operation in Vermont. She had built a 5-year financial model with conservative revenue projections and a realistic estimate of the transition period, the years between starting regenerative practice and the point where the soil improvement begins to translate into measurable yield gains. Her model said she had enough runway. She bought 48 acres on the Oregon coast in late 2018. The soil was tired, not destroyed, but depleted. Previous conventional management had left it with 1.2% organic matter, compaction throughout the top 8 inches, and almost no measurable biological activity below the plow layer. Exactly the kind of land that regenerative agriculture is designed to restore. She knew what she was getting into. She started correctly. Year 1. She planted cover crops across every acre, a diverse mix of legumes, brassicas, and grasses, designed to break compaction, fix nitrogen, and begin feeding the soil biology that had been starved for years. She did not till, not once. Every instinct from conventional agriculture said to turn the soil before planting, to prepare it, to aerate it, to clean it up. Claire left it alone. Because no-till is not laziness. It is a deliberate decision to protect the fungal networks, the bacterial communities, and the aggregate structure that take years to build and 20 minutes to destroy with a moldboard plow. Year 2. She introduced a small mixed livestock operation, 12 sheep and 18 laying hens, on a rotational grazing schedule that moved animals every 4 to 7 days, never allowing them to stay long enough to overgraze any section. The animals did 3 things simultaneously that no purchased input can replicate. Their manure added organic matter directly and constantly to the soil. Their hooves, applied at the right pressure for the right duration, broke up surface compaction in a way that actually stimulates grassroot growth rather than damaging it. And the disturbance of their grazing triggered the native grass seed bank that had been dormant in the soil to germinate, species that hadn't been visible on that land in over a decade. Year 3. She established relationships with 4 restaurants in Portland and 2 in Astoria, premium farm-to-table operations that had committed to sourcing from regenerative producers within 100 miles. She had a standing arrangement, signed letters of intent, a delivery schedule. Everything in place. Her soil tests at the end of Year 3 showed organic matter up from 1.2 to 3.1%. The cover crop establishment was described by the extension agent as some of the cleanest he had seen from a transitioning operation. The sheep were healthy. The hens were productive. The land was visibly changing, darker, softer, holding moisture after rain in a way it hadn't before. She was 18 months away from the point where her model predicted the improved soil would begin producing the premium yields that justified the premium prices the restaurants were paying. 18 months. Here is the thing about regenerative agriculture that the books explain, but the financial models underestimate. The transition period is not a straight line. When you stop applying synthetic fertilizers, yields drop. Not because the system isn't working, but because the biological processes that will eventually replace those inputs take time to establish. Mycorrhizal fungi, the underground networks that connect plant roots to soil nutrients in forms they can actually absorb, take 2 to 4 years to colonize a field meaningfully after being suppressed by synthetic chemistry. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the root zones of legumes take multiple seasons to build populations large enough to replace synthetic nitrogen inputs. Soil aggregates, the crumb-like structures that hold air and water and make soil feel alive in your hand, take years of undisturbed biological activity to rebuild after compaction. During that rebuilding period, you are farming land that is getting healthier every season, but not yet performing at the level that will eventually justify the investment. You are paying the costs of a working farm. You are not yet receiving the returns of a healthy one. That gap between the costs continuing and the returns arriving is where farms die. Claire's model had accounted for it. What her model had not accounted for was what happened in March of 2020. Within 8 weeks, 3 of her 4 Portland restaurant accounts were closed. Not reduced, closed. The letters of intent meant nothing to a restaurant that no longer existed. She pivoted. Farmers markets, a CSA with 60 members she built from scratch in the middle of a pandemic. Direct delivery routes she drove herself 3 days a week. She adapted every way she knew how. But the premium market that regenerative agriculture depends on, the buyers who will pay more for food grown differently, had collapsed at exactly the moment her farm needed it most. Let's be specific about what happened. Because the story of regenerative agriculture's economics is not told with enough specificity, and that vagueness is costing people who deserve better information. Claire's annual operating costs in year 3 were approximately $67,000. That included seed, livestock feed during winter months, equipment maintenance, market fees, fuel, and her own minimal living expenses. She had stopped taking a salary in year 2. Her revenue in year 3, after the restaurant closures, came in at $41,000, a gap of $26,000. She had savings. She covered it. Year 4, operating costs $71,000, revenue $48,000, gap $23,000. She had less savings. She covered it again. By the end of year 4, her soil organic matter was at 4.4%. By the end of year 4, her savings were gone. Here is the specific thing that nobody explains clearly enough in the literature. The point at which a regenerative system becomes self-sustaining, where the biological fertility of the soil is producing yields comparable to conventional yields without purchased inputs. That point typically arrives between years 5 and 8 for a severely depleted starting soil. Claire's soil started at 1.2%. She was on track. She was ahead of the typical timeline, actually, but the runway she had built assumed continuous premium market access. Without it, she needed 2 more years of capital she no longer had. The farm that failed her was not the ecological farm. The ecological farm was succeeding. What failed her was the economic system surrounding regenerative agriculture, one that requires premium buyers, stable direct relationships, and enough capital buffer to survive the years when the market cannot support the transition. She had 2 of the 3. The final soil test came back 6 weeks before she signed the papers. Organic matter, 5.8%. The extension agent called her after he received the results. "This is remarkable for 4 years," he said. She thanked him. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. She had already answered that question. She had found a buyer, a young couple from Corvallis who were starting their own regenerative operation and wanted land that was already in transition. She sold it to them at a price that reflected the soil's condition, not just the acreage, which meant she recovered more than a conventional sale would have returned, because she had built something real, even if she couldn't hold on to it. The day she handed over the keys, she walked the south field one last time. She pulled a handful of soil. Dark, cool, alive. She had built that. 4 years of correct decisions had built that, and she left it behind for someone else to harvest. 6 months after the sale, Claire Ashworth started consulting. Not because it was a happy ending, because she had 4 years of documented data on exactly what happens when a transitioning regenerative farm loses premium market access mid-transition, and that data was worth something to every farmer attempting the same journey. Her first client was a 90-acre operation in Washington state, whose owner had read the same books she had, built a similar model, and was entering year 2 of transition with a restaurant-dependent revenue structure. Claire's first recommendation: build a capital reserve that assumes you will lose your premium market for at least 1 full year. Not because the market will fail, but because if it does, you need to survive it. Her second recommendation: do not model your transition income on the premium market alone. Build a base of direct consumer relationships, CSA members, online ordering, local retail, that will hold even when restaurants close. Her third recommendation: understand exactly which year your specific starting soil conditions are likely to become self-sustaining, based on documented transition data. Not the optimistic scenario, the realistic one. By the end of her first year consulting, Claire had worked with 11 farms. 8 of them were still operating. There is a version of this story that gets told as a warning. Don't try regenerative agriculture. The economics don't work. That version is wrong. And there is a version that gets told as inspiration. She failed and came back stronger. Proof that resilience wins. That version is too easy. The true version is harder and more useful than either. Regenerative agriculture works. The science is real. The soil data is real. The ecological outcomes are measurable and repeatable and genuinely extraordinary. What doesn't always work is the financial architecture that most people build around it. The assumption that the premium market will hold, that the transition timeline will be smooth, that the capital runway will be sufficient. Claire Ashworth spent 4 years building some of the healthiest soil on the Oregon coast. She lost the farm. She didn't lose what she learned. And what she learned is worth more to the next generation of farmers than any story that ends with someone keeping their land. Because the question isn't just how to farm regeneratively. The question is how to survive long enough for the soil to pay you back. And that question, the honest, uncomfortable, financially specific version of it, is one this industry needs to answer better than it has. The farmer's ledger. Some stories don't end the way you want them to. They end the way they are.